You were not abandoned. You were kept inside a loop you do not understand. And the most painful part is not that they leave. It is that you keep hoping this time they will stay. Have you ever been in something like that, where everything starts fast, deep, and feels real? They enter your life quietly, but somehow reach parts of you that no one else ever has. They listen in a way that makes you believe that finally someone sees you, not on the surface, but for who you really are. And you begin to open up, not because you are easy, but because you feel safe. You think you have found something rare, a connection that not everyone gets to experience. But right when you start believing in it, everything shifts. No warning, no clear reason, just a quiet withdrawal that you can feel immediately. The messages slow down, the energy changes, the warmth fades, and you notice it without needing proof. You just know something is wrong. And from that moment, you begin replaying everything, every conversation, every word, every look, asking yourself what you did wrong, wondering if you were too much, too fast, too intense, and you start adjusting. You become softer, quieter, less demanding, thinking if you just get it right, they will come back the way they were in the beginning. And then they do come back, warm again, present again, making you feel chosen again. And you feel relief. You tell yourself everything is okay now, that it was just a phase, just a misunderstanding. But deep inside, there is still something unsettled, a quiet anxiety you cannot explain. You are never fully at ease, never fully certain, always waiting for the next shift, the next distance, the next disappearance. And you start living inside that instability as if it is normal. You call it love. You convince yourself that all relationships have ups and downs. But the truth you are not ready to face is that this is not a normal relationship. This is a loop. And inside that loop, you are not the one being chosen. You are the one trying to earn being chosen again and again. And the hardest truth is this: you were not abandoned. You were kept by hope, kept by emotion, kept by moments just good enough to make you stay. And every time they pull away, you do not just lose them, you lose your sense of self. And every time they return, you do not just feel happy, you feel relief, because the pain temporarily disappears. And that is what keeps you there, not because they are perfect, but because you have not yet seen what is actually controlling you. And until you do, you will keep calling this loop love. It never feels like a pattern. When you are inside it, it feels like something real, something unfinished, something that just needs a little more patience, a little more understanding, a little more effort from you. And that is exactly why it keeps pulling you back in, because every cycle feels slightly different, even though it always ends the same way. They come close again, not all at once, but just enough. A message that feels warmer than usual, a conversation that suddenly goes deeper, a moment where they look at you like you matter again, and your body reacts before your mind can question it. You feel that rush, that sense of relief, that feeling that maybe this time things are different, and you lean in again, carefully at first, but then more openly, because you want to believe it is real. You want to believe that what you felt in the beginning was not an illusion, and for a short time everything feels aligned. The energy is there, the connection feels alive again. You tell yourself this is what you were waiting for, this is why you stayed, but then it happens again, not dramatically, not in a way you can clearly point to, just a shift, a delay in response, a change in tone, a distance you can feel but cannot explain. And instantly something inside you tightens. Your mind starts scanning for answers, your body starts preparing for loss, and before anything is even confirmed, you are already in it, overthinking every detail, reading between lines that may or may not exist, trying to predict what is coming next. You start asking yourself questions you have asked 100 times before. Did I say too much? Did I expect too much? Did I move too fast? Should I pull back? Should I say less? Should I pretend I do not care as much? And the more you think, the more you lose clarity, because you are not responding to reality anymore. You are responding to fear, and that fear makes you adjust yourself. You shrink a little, you hold back a little, you try to become easier to keep, easier to handle, easier to stay with. And in doing that, you slowly disconnect from yourself without even realizing it. And then just when the anxiety reaches its peak, they come back again, sometimes casually, sometimes warmly, sometimes as if nothing ever happened. And the moment they do, everything inside you relaxes, the tension disappears, the questions fade, the doubt quiets down, and you feel something that feels like happiness, but is actually relief. Relief that you were not abandoned, relief that you did not lose them, relief that the connection is still there. And that relief is powerful, more powerful than you think, because it teaches your brain something dangerous. It teaches your brain that the pain was worth it, that the confusion was worth it, that the waiting was worth it, because in the end you got them back. And that is how the loop reinforces itself, not through constant love, but through inconsistent reward. You are not attached to them as much as you are attached to the emotional roller coaster they create. The highs feel higher because of the lows. The connection feels deeper because of the distance. And you start to crave the moments when everything feels right again, even if it means going through the chaos to get there. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to measure the relationship not by stability or safety, but by intensity. You start believing that if it feels this strong, it must mean something. If it hurts this much, it must be real. If you cannot let go, it must be love. But what you are actually experiencing is a loop that feeds on your sensitivity, a loop that you are starting from deeper attachment, deeper confusion, deeper emotional dependence. And the most dangerous part is that you do not see it as a loop. You see it as a story that has not finished yet. You believe there is a version of this that will finally work, a version where they stay, a version where the connection stabilizes, a version where all of this pain makes sense. And that belief is what keeps you inside, not because you are weak, but because you have not yet realized that the pattern itself is the problem, not the timing, not the circumstances, not even the person. And until you see that clearly, you will keep going through the same cycle, calling it something meaningful, calling it something rare, calling it love, even as it slowly takes more from you each time it repeats. This does not happen because you chose the wrong person. It happens because two systems met each other at exactly the wrong place. And what felt like chemistry was actually compatibility at the level of wounds, not at the level of stability. And that is why it feels so intense, because it is not random. It is familiar in a way your body recognizes, even if your mind does not. The person you are dealing with is not confused in the way you think they are. They are consistent, just not in a way that creates security when things are light, when there is distance, when emotions are controlled. They move closer, they open up just enough to create connection. But the moment that connection starts to deepen, the moment expectations become real, the moment emotional closeness requires consistency, something inside them reacts, not consciously, not intentionally, but automatically. Their system interprets closeness as pressure, intimacy as loss of control, and vulnerability as risk. So they pull away, not because they do not feel anything, but because they feel too much in a way they cannot regulate. And distance becomes their way to stabilize themselves. So when they disappear, it is not confusion, it is regulation. And when they come back, it is not commitment, it is comfort. They return when they feel safe again, not when the relationship is safe. And that is a critical difference, because it means their presence is based on their internal state, not on mutual stability. And while they are moving based on avoiding overwhelm, you are moving in the opposite direction. You are wired to seek connection, to move toward emotional depth, to repair, to understand, to hold things together. And that wiring did not come from nowhere. It came from experience, from environments where reading emotions was necessary, where connection was not always stable, where you learned that closeness could disappear without warning. So you adapted, you became more aware, more attuned, more invested, because that was how you created safety. And now when you feel distance, your system does not tell you to step back. It tells you to move closer, to fix it, to restore what was lost. Because to you, connection equals safety. and losing it feels like danger. So while they regulate by creating space, you regulate by trying to close the gap. And that is where the loop locks in, because each of you is solving a different problem. They are trying to avoid being overwhelmed. You are trying to avoid being disconnected. And both strategies cancel each other out. The closer you get, the more they feel pressure, the more they pull away. The more they pull away, the more you feel urgency, the more you try to reconnect. And neither of you is wrong, but together the dynamic becomes unstable. And this is where it goes deeper, because this is not just behavior. This is your nervous system responding to patterns it learnt long before this person ever existed. When you feel them pulling away, your body does not experience it as a small shift. It experiences it as loss, as uncertainty, as something that needs to be fixed immediately. Your mind starts searching for solutions. Your emotions intensify. Your focus narrows onto the relationship, and you begin to invest more energy into restoring what was there. And when they return, your system relaxes, not because the relationship is secure, but because the threat is gone. And that relief reinforces your attachment even more. So you are not just reacting to them, you are reacting to a deeper pattern inside you, a pattern that equates inconsistency with something you need to solve rather than something you need to walk away from. And this is why logic does not break the cycle, because it is not a logical loop. It is a biological one. Your nervous system has learned that connection comes with instability, and instead of rejecting that instability, it tries to manage it, to understand it, to survive inside it. And over time, that creates a belief that feels true, even if it is not. The belief that if you just understand them enough, if you just love them correctly, if you just stay long enough, the pattern will change. But the pattern is not waiting to change. It is repeating itself exactly as it was designed to. And until you see that clearly, you will keep personalizing something that was never about your worth in the first place. It was about two systems running their programming at the same time, one moving toward connection, the other moving away from it. And the intensity you feel is not proof that this is right. It is proof that this is familiar. And familiar does not mean healthy. It just means your system knows how to survive there. And survival is not the same as love. This is the part no one tells you. Because from the outside, it looks like you are just in love with someone complicated. It looks like you are being patient, understanding, loyal. It even looks admirable, like you are someone who does not give up easily, someone who sees potential where others walk away. But what is actually happening is far more subtle and far more dangerous, because you are not staying for them. You are staying for the feeling they give you when they come back. And that is the part your mind keeps missing. You think the goal is to make the relationship work, but your nervous system is chasing something else entirely. It is chasing the relief that comes after uncertainty. It is chasing the moment when the tension disappears, when the distance closes, when they choose you again. And that moment feels powerful, almost addictive, because it resolves the anxiety that has been building inside you. And the longer the uncertainty lasts, the stronger that relief feels, which means the cycle is not weakening your attachment, it is intensifying it. Every time they pull away, your system goes into deficit. Every time they return, your system gets rewarded. And over time, your brain starts associating them with both the pain and the relief. And that combination creates one of the strongest emotional bonds possible, not because it is healthy, but because it is inconsistent. And inconsistency is what keeps you hooked. If they were distant all the time, you would leave. If they were consistent all the time, you would feel safe. But this middle ground, this unpredictability, this constant shift between presence and absence, it keeps you engaged, because your brain is always trying to solve it, always trying to predict it, always trying to earn stability from something that is not designed to give it. And this is where the illusion becomes complete, because you start believing that the intensity you feel is proof of depth. You start believing that the emotional highs mean the connection is rare, that the fact you cannot let go means it must be real. But what you are actually experiencing is a reinforcement loop, the same mechanism that keeps people addicted to things that hurt them, because the reward does not come every time. It comes just enough to keep you trying, just enough to keep you hoping, just enough to make you believe that if you do it right this time, everything will finally stabilize. And that belief is the trap, because it turns the relationship into something you have to win, something you have to fix, something you have to prove yourself worthy of. And the more you invest, the harder it becomes to walk away, not because they are irreplaceable, but because your brain has linked them to the only moments of relief you get from the anxiety they create. And that is why letting go feels so difficult. It does not feel like you are losing a person. It feels like you are losing access to the only thing that makes the pain stop. And this is the twist you were not expecting. You are not trying to keep them, you are trying to keep the cycle going, because the cycle itself has become familiar, predictable in its unpredictability, and your system has learned how to function inside it, even if it is slowly draining you. And the most uncomfortable truth is this: the more you try to fix it, the deeper you fall into it, because every attempt to understand them, to adjust yourself, to hold the connection together, is not breaking the loop, it is feeding it. You are investing more energy into something that only exists because it keeps resetting. And until you see that clearly, you will keep telling yourself that you just need one more chance, one more conversation, one more moment where everything finally makes sense, but it will not, because the loop is not waiting to resolve. It is designed to repeat, and the only reason it still has power over you is because a part of you still believes that if you stay long enough, it will eventually turn into something stable, when in reality, it has already shown you exactly what it is again and again. You just have not accepted it yet. There is always a moment when something inside you stops chasing, not because you suddenly became stronger overnight, not because they finally gave you clarity, but because you are tired in a way that thinking cannot fix anymore. It is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost invisible, but it changes everything. You wake up one day and the questions feel heavier than the answers. The overthinking feels exhausting instead of necessary. The hope that used to keep you going now starts to feel like something that is draining you. And for the first time, you stop asking what they are doing and start noticing what you are feeling. You notice how much of your energy is tied to their behavior, how your mood shifts based on their presence, how your sense of worth rises and falls depending on whether they are close or distant. And that realization is uncomfortable because it shows you something you did not want to see. It shows you that you have been living reactively, not consciously, that your emotional state has been controlled by a pattern you thought you were managing. And this is where the shift begins. Not in them, in you, you start asking a different question, not why they keep doing this, but why you keep staying in it. And that question does not have an easy answer, because it forces you to look inward instead of outward. It forces you to see that part of you that keeps hoping, that keeps believing, that keeps trying to make something unstable feel secure. And at first you resist that because it is easier to believe that the solution is out there, that if they change, everything will finally make sense. But slowly that belief starts to crack. You begin to see that even when they come back, even when things feel good again, there is still a part of you that is waiting for the next shift, the next withdrawal, the next moment where you lose them again. And that means the problem was never just their behavior, it was the dynamic itself, a dynamic that keeps you emotionally invested without ever giving you real stability. And once you see that, even for a moment, something changes, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to fully believing the story you told yourself before. You begin to understand that you were not trying to build a relationship. You were trying to manage a pattern, and managing a pattern is not the same as being loved. And this is where the power starts to return, not all at once, but in small decisions, in moments where you pause instead of reacting, in moments where you choose not to chase clarity from someone who keeps creating confusion, in moments where you realize that your energy is not something to be given automatically. It is something to be protected, and that realization is not comfortable because it means letting go of the illusion that if you just tried harder, things would work. It means accepting that effort was never the missing piece, that love was never the problem, that your ability to understand was never what was lacking, and that can feel like loss because you are not just letting go of them. You are letting go of the version of the story where everything eventually turns out the way you hoped, but at the same time, something else begins to emerge, a sense of clarity, a sense of distance from the emotional chaos that used to control you. You start to see the pattern instead of being inside it. And when you see it clearly, even if you are still in it, it does not have the same hold over you, because awareness breaks illusion, and illusion is what kept you stuck. And this is the turning point most people never reach, because it requires you to stop looking for answers in them and start finding them in yourself. It requires you to admit that the reason you stayed was not because you could not leave, but because a part of you was not ready to. And once you understand that, you stop feeling powerless, because the control you thought they had over you was never fully theirs. It was shared. And if it was shared, it means you can take your part back slowly, quietly, without needing a dramatic ending, without needing closure from them, just by seeing clearly what this is and deciding, maybe for the first time, that you no longer want to participate in it the same way again. Power does not come back the way you expect it to. It does not arrive as confidence or certainty or some sudden ability to stop caring overnight. It comes back quietly, almost unnoticeably, in the way you start pausing instead of reacting, in the way you begin to sit with your emotions instead of immediately trying to fix them through someone else. And that is the first shift. You stop treating your feelings as something that needs to be resolved by their presence. You start seeing them as signals, not emergencies. And that changes everything. Because when your emotions are no longer urgent, you are no longer easy to control. Before this, you were responding instantly. When they pulled away, you felt the need to close the distance. When they returned, you felt the need to reconnect. Everything was immediate, everything was reactive. But now there is space. And in that space, you begin to see more clearly. You begin to notice patterns you used to ignore. You begin to recognize when someone is offering presence without consistency, attention without intention, connection without stability. And instead of trying to make sense of it, you simply observe it. And observation creates distance, and distance creates power. You are no longer inside the emotional current. You are watching it. And once you start watching it, you stop being pulled by it. In the same way, this is where boundaries begin to form, not as rules you force yourself to follow, but as realizations you cannot unsee. You realize that not every message deserves a response. Not every moment of warmth deserves your trust. Not every return deserves your availability. And that realization is not cold. It is clarity, because for the first time you are separating what feels good from what is actually good for you. And those two things are not always the same. You start to understand that silence is not a loss of connection. It is a form of self-protection, that stepping back is not rejection, it is alignment, that not explaining yourself is not avoidance, it is self-respect. And these shifts are subtle but powerful because they change how you show up. You are no longer overgiving to maintain something unstable. You are no longer trying to prove your value to someone who only recognizes it when it is convenient. You are no longer shrinking to make the dynamic easier to sustain. And because of that, the dynamic itself starts to change, not always because they change, but because your participation changes. You are no longer predictable in the way the pattern needs you to be. You do not chase the distance the same way. You do not reward the inconsistency the same way. And when that happens, one of two things always follows. Either they step up into consistency or they fade away because the pattern no longer works. And this is where many people get uncomfortable, because they think reclaiming power means controlling the outcome, but it does not. It means being okay with whatever the outcome reveals, because your focus is no longer on keeping the connection It is on keeping yourself, and that is a completely different orientation. You begin to value your energy in a way you never did before. You recognize that your attention is not something to be given automatically. It is something that shapes your reality. Where you place it determines how you feel, how you think, how you live. And once you see that, you become more intentional, not rigid, not closed, just aware. Aware of who has access to you, aware of what dynamics require you to abandon yourself, to sustain them, aware of what connections actually nourish you instead of draining you. And this awareness changes how you love, because you are no longer loving from fear, you are loving from choice. You are no longer giving to avoid losing someone. You are giving because it aligns with you, and if it does not align, you are willing to step back, not as a punishment, not as a game, but as a boundary. And boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about defining where you end and someone else begins. And once that line becomes clear, you stop losing yourself in the process of trying to keep someone else. You stop negotiating your worth based on how they respond to you. You stop measuring the relationship by how intense it feels and start measuring it by how stable it is. And that shift is what breaks the cycle, not because it forces the other person to change, but because it removes the conditions that allowed the loop to continue in the first place. And this is what real power looks like. It is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is not about winning. It is about no longer needing to fight for something that costs you your peace. It is about standing in a place where your energy is no longer available to anything that requires you to disappear, to sustain it. And once you reach that place, even if you still feel something for them, even if part of you still cares, it does not control you the same way, because you are no longer choosing them at the expense of yourself. You are choosing yourself first, and everything else becomes secondary to that. There is a moment that does not feel like a victory, but quietly changes everything. It is not when they finally understand you. It is not when they suddenly become consistent. And it is not when the relationship magically turns into what you hoped it would be. It is when you no longer need it to. It is when something inside you stops waiting, stops hoping, stops trying to turn uncertainty into stability. And at first it feels unfamiliar, almost empty, because you are so used to the emotional intensity, the constant thinking, the constant checking, the constant feeling that something needs to be solved. And without that, there is space, and that space can feel uncomfortable before it feels peaceful, because for the first time, you're not reacting to them. You are just existing without needing them to define how you feel. And then something subtle happens. They reach out again, maybe in the same way they always have. Same tone, same timing, same energy that used to pull you right back in. And you notice it, but this time your body does not respond the same way. There is no rush, no urgency, no immediate need to engage. You read it, you understand it, but you are not pulled into it. And that is when you realize something has changed, not in the situation, but in you. You see the pattern without feeling controlled by it. You recognize the cycle without needing to complete it. And that awareness creates a kind of distance that cannot be undone, because once you see clearly, you cannot go back to confusion. You cannot pretend you do not understand what is happening anymore. And in that clarity, something else becomes obvious. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong place. You were never too intense. You were investing in something that could not hold it. You were never too emotional. You were responding to instability that required constant adjustment. And once you see that, the story you told yourself begins to fall apart. The story that said if you were just better, calmer, easier, they would stay, because now you understand that their staying was never based on who you were. It was based on what they could handle, and what they could handle was never consistent. And that has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their limits. And when that realization fully lands, something shifts permanently. You stop trying to be chosen by someone who cannot consistently choose. You stop interpreting their inconsistency as something you need to solve. and start seeing it as something you no longer want to participate in. And that is where real freedom begins, not in getting closure from them, not in finally understanding every detail, but in no longer needing to, because clarity has replaced confusion and self-respect has replaced the need for validation. And from that place, your decisions become simple, not easy, but clear. You no longer stay where you feel uncertain. You no longer invest where there is no stability. You no longer chase what keeps disappearing. And most importantly, you no longer abandon yourself to keep someone else. And this is the part no one tells you about healing. It does not make you stop caring. It just changes what you are willing to carry. You can still feel something for them and choose not to go back. You can still remember what it felt like and not want to relive it. You can still understand them and decide they are not for you. And that is a different kind of strength. Not the strength to hold on, but the strength to let go without needing everything to make sense. And maybe the deepest shift of all is this: you stop seeing the end of the relationship as a loss and start seeing it as the moment you finally stepped out of something that was never giving you what you thought it was. And when you look back, you do not just see what you lost, you see what you reclaimed: your time, your energy, your clarity, your sense of self. And for the first time, you are not waiting for them to come back. You are not hoping they will change. You are not wondering what could have been, because you already know. You have seen it play out enough times to understand exactly where it leads. And instead of feeling pulled back into it, you feel something else, something quieter, something steadier, something that does not need intensity to feel real. And maybe for the first time, you do not miss them the way you thought you would, because what you were really missing was never them. It was the version of yourself that kept trying to make it work. And now that version of you is no longer in control. And without that version, the loop has nothing left to hold on to. And that is the final shift. Not that they are gone, but that even if they come back, you are no longer there waiting inside the same story.